Hi guys, so Prime Minister Boris Johnson was interviewed by Sky News about the problems at the ports. Now, because it's Boris Johnson, he's a compulsive liar, spoiler, he lies. Now, he blames, in this interview, he blames lorry drivers and the haulage companies for not filling out the paperwork correctly. And second, he blames the entire problem on the pandemic. So let's hear what he had to say.
Just very quickly, there are dozens of hauliers holding up Whitehall at the moment because they want to know what you meant when you said that you were going to support seafood exporters through a tough period because of the new Brexit red tape. What are you going to do?
Well, insofar as there are problems at the moment caused by teething problems, people not filling in the right forms or misunderstandings.
People not filling in the right forms. So once again, and I've said this before, the Boris Johnson will always find somebody else to blame. Now, this is not the problem. This is not the fault of the haulage companies. They didn't ask for this. You know, just over 2 weeks ago, they were able to export their goods across the border without any of this paperwork. The government introduced this paperwork. The government introduced a system that doesn't work, that doesn't communicate between the ports and the haulage companies. And the haulage companies who need to access the system have to pay a monthly fee in order to access it. And it doesn't work. And it's their fault, not the government's fault.
And when it's not people's fault, of course we're going to compensate and to help out, and funds have been put in place to...
Now, Boris Johnson is promising to compensate people if they didn't make the mistake. Okay, well, how are you going to determine that they didn't make the mistake if the system is broken? So in that case, everyone is going to be given compensation because the system is broken. Look, Boris Johnson is probably lying here when he says that they're going to compensate businesses. They're not going to compensate businesses. You know, if Boris Johnson says we're going to compensate businesses, you can be guaranteed that that's not going to happen. These companies are being told, yeah, we're going to help you, we're going to support you, and this is just some interview that Boris Johnson has given. It's not actually, it's very important to differentiate what Boris Johnson says and the policies that he puts in place. The funding that he allocates to something. At the moment, there isn't any funding allocated. Now, I haven't seen any information about this unless it has just popped up or if it hasn't been reported. But at the moment, Boris Johnson is making promises. Boris Johnson is not putting his money where his mouth is.
Do that, but be in no doubt, Nick, that there are great opportunities for fishermen across the whole of the UK to take advantage of the spectacular marine wealth of the United Kingdom.
But that's not the problem here, Boris. The problem is that they can't export. Not that they can't export, that they're having trouble exporting. Some are able to export, some are not. The problem is the paperwork that you introduced because you want to leave the single market and the customs union. It was never a requirement. The EU never said if you leave the EU, you have to also leave the single market and the customs union. Brexiteers like this guy on the screen said, no, we want to leave the single market and the customs union. And now there's this extra paperwork, which is creating problems for anyone who's selling fresh produce. In this case, fish. Now we're going to see probably this week other examples of other industries that are being affected by this as well. At the moment we're focusing on fish, but I can guarantee you other industries are affected. The problem is the paperwork that Boris Johnson and the Brexiteers voted for, pushed through, wanted. Don't blame it on something else. This is the problem here. The people who are in this case, you can see on the screen, British shellfish lorries, they need to sell their produce as quickly as possible. It needs to cross the border as soon as possible, in as short a time as possible, so that it arrives in the market at the customer fresh. Because if there's a delay, it's no longer fresh and the customer doesn't want it. This is nothing to do with taking back control of waters or having a bigger quota or anything like that. The fish is there. It needs to be transported.
In just 5 years' time, 5.5 years' time, we will have access to all the fish in all of our coastal waters.
Okay, so you're telling this to small businesses in Scotland, for example, who are saying, we can't survive another week. And your response to them is, just wait 5 years and then you'll be able to fish all you want. And they say, yes, but the problem is not access to fish. The problem is selling the bloody fish. How do we sell the fish into the EU if it's arriving there rotten? And your response is, but in 5 years you'll be able to access all the fish. Boris Johnson is appearing here disconnected. He's disconnected from reality. He's not disconnected from reality. He's playing his character again, lying. He knows exactly the problem. He's deflecting. He's talking about a different issue.
And before then, from now, as I talk to you today, we have access to 25% more than we did a month ago. And
who gives a crap how much access you have? That is not the issue.
That means that there is scope for fishing communities, fishers across the UK to take advantage of the increase in quota. And what we're going to do is give people a helping hand. And that's why we've set up the £100 million fund to help people with their boats, to help the fish.
Now, I don't know if this is true or not. Boris Johnson is saying it, so we have to take his word. I don't know how valuable Boris Johnson's word is, but let's say, for example, there is a fund set up. How come this was never talked about before? How come the Brexiteers and Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg, Michael Gove never said, look, when we get to the end of the transition period, you know, last year they could have said this, when we get to the end of the transition period, there's going to be a bit of a disaster on the 1st of January. But don't worry, we're going to help you out. Instead, what has happened is they said, don't worry, there may be some hiccups. That's what they said towards the end of the transition period. But about a year ago, they were saying, everything's great. Everything's fantastic. Everything's hunky-dory. It's sunlit uplands. Fishermen will be able to export wherever they want, all over the world. Without any problems. They never said that they knew, or at least they should have known, because their experts would have been telling them this, there will be problems. Now you should inform the industries to prepare for those problems. You should be ready to put some money aside in order to help those industries when they face those problems. But instead the Brexiteers said, no, there will be no problems. Project Fear. Stop with your Project Fear. Everything will be great.
Processing industry in this country and to help rejuvenate a historic and proud industry in the UK. The government will support it. We think the opportunity...
Stop saying the government will support it. It's the taxpayer that will support it. So you're taking money from the taxpayer to give to an industry that has been crippled by you. Is that fair? Did the taxpayers say, I want to help the fishing industry because they were tricked into supporting a con that is Brexit? We want to support them because they're suffering at the moment. Is that fair? I don't think it's fair. Boris Johnson should be putting his hand in his pocket. The Conservative Party should be putting their hand in their pocket. Maybe they should get on to Nigel Farage as well. He probably has a few quid lying around somewhere. Maybe they should ask him to donate to the fishing industry because they were conned into voting for this. Somehow I don't think that's going to happen.
Is massive.
What's your message for those exporters who are losing money at the moment because their food isn't getting to the continent in time?
I sympathise very, very much.
This is probably the biggest lie of the whole lot. I sympathise greatly. I sympathise a lot. Yes. Boris Johnson has no sympathy for anyone. Even his own children he doesn't have sympathy for.
And I understand their frustrations and I understand their concerns. Obviously, things have been exacerbated by the COVID pandemic. Unfortunately, the demand in restaurants on the continent for UK fish has not been what it was before the pandemic.
He's blaming the pandemic for bureaucracy. These fishermen have never said, we can't sell our fish because there's no request for it. The fishermen have never said, look, because of the pandemic, the French, the Germans, the Spanish, they're not requesting our fish. What are we supposed to do? Boris, help us. No, that's not the problem. Once again, he's deflecting. He's like, okay, I've made a mess. Who can I blame? Okay, I can blame the fishermen for not completing their documents correctly. Okay, who else can I blame? COVID. Yeah, I can blame the pandemic. That's great. I can blame the pandemic for everything. You know, I'm having problems in the bedroom. Blame the pandemic. I'm having problems with fishermen. Blame the pandemic. I'm having problems, you know, in the party. Blame the pandemic. Everything is blame the pandemic. Blame the workers. Blame the public. Blame the Labour Party. Blame the opposition. Blame everyone but yourself.
Just because the restaurants have been closed for so long, and that is one of the problems we're all trying to deal with. Unfortunately, this is driven in large part by the pandemic.
It's not. Once again, he's lying. Stop lying, Boris. I know it's difficult for you. It's like breathing, you know. He does it without even thinking. This is not about the pandemic. This is not about a lack of restaurants open in Spain or in France or in other parts of the EU where these markets are. That's not the issue. There is a request for British products. The problem is the bureaucracy. The problem is the ports. Now, unfortunately, you haven't hired enough staff at the ports. You haven't upgraded the IT systems. You haven't tested them correctly. Lorry drivers are arriving there with their documents. Now, there was a story of a lorry driver who arrived with his documents. He had to queue. He was sent to another port. He had to queue. He came back. And what happened was, after, I don't know how long it had passed, but his Kent access permit expired. And he was given a fine of £300. So he was fined under no fault of his own. How is that justified? This is your fault. Your government's fault. Remember, now, look, if you can take away one thing from this, is that this is Brexit's fault. It's not Boris Johnson's deal. I want people to remember that. This has nothing to do with the deal. This is because of Brexit. Leaving the single market and customs union means you need these checks. You need these documentation, these documents. Somewhere I read it's like something like 40 documents that are required for single products. In some cases, the trucks have to arrive, they have to be opened, the goods have to be checked, the documents have to be checked, and then they're sent on their way. And that takes time. Now, we have to remember, it's not just the time of the check, it's the queuing time that's the problem. Now, you can try and throw money at it, you can try and invest in it, but it will take time for that to recover. There are teething problems that can be resolved. There are some things that are permanent. Now, if the government had invested properly at the beginning, if they had taken Brexit, the problems of Brexit seriously, they could have resolved this. They could have preempted it, and they could have reduced, not eliminated, of course, but reduced some of the problems at the ports. But instead, they were saying continuously, Brexit is not a problem. Brexit is a great opportunity. There'll be no checks at the borders like, you know, the Remainers are saying, or the Project Fear mongers are saying. This is the consequence of Brexit. Boris Johnson convinced people that everything would be okay, and he lied. And now he's lying again in this interview. I wish Sky News would actually hold him a bit to account and say, Boris, stop lying. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot. I want to say a big thank you to all of my patrons. You ensure that this channel continues to exist. I'm eternally grateful for all of your support. If you join Patreon, you will receive instant access to our Discord server, where we have both audio and video chats. You can chat with me and other patrons, where we discuss important and non-important issues. Becoming a patron per month costs about the same as a large coffee, so why not check it out?